and I teach at the University of Cyprus. I'm an associate professor there, and I coordinate this project, which is called Knowledge Alliance for Evidence-Based Urban Practices, and is funded by the European Commission by Erasmus Plus. It's a 3 years project. I'll say a few words about the project so you get an idea what it is about. Basically, we started off from acknowledging that there are quite a number of successful enterprises in Europe who have made research outputs the core element of their practice in order to address challenges, urban challenges like sustainability, mobility, health, social cohesion, among others. And KAEBUP's main objective is basically to create a method, an international educational and training method, which can offer the participants to this project the opportunity to engage with professional environments, learning how research can be the basis for innovative professional practices, and on the other hand, learning what businesses in the field of planning, architecture, and urban design require from academia. So the aim is to establish this link between research, practice, and academia. To address that, KAEBUP's partners comprise higher education institutions, NGOs, and enterprises from 4 different European countries who have expertise of evidence-based design and who wish to strengthen this link between businesses and higher education institutions to mutually benefit from the tools that research can provide to enterprises and from the experience of evidence-based practice. And to achieve these objectives, we have 3 paths, as we call them, 3 pathways to evidence-based urban practice, which include, first of all, teaching and learning through knowledge exchange, skills development, through real-life urban projects. The second one is to understand and develop business models for evidence-based practices. And the third one, to co-create urban knowledge through multiple modes of exchange and involvement of our students, teaching, and company staff in a number of activities, one of which is the one we are going to talk about today. So today's event specifically aims at presenting and discussing the outcomes of our research on market opportunities for evidence-based practices in architecture, urban design, and planning. It's actually the first part of our research work in KAEBUP. So we have with us Anna Margaritova and Christalla Psathiti, who have worked on this topic, and they are going to present the outcomes of this exploration. Christalla is an architect, and she has founded Place Architecture. She's a researcher also at the Department of Architecture at the University of Cyprus. And Anna is an architect. She has founded Anna Margaritova Architecture and Design, and she's a researcher as well at the Center for Entrepreneurship at the University of Cyprus. So they will present the outcomes of this project, and then we will continue with a roundtable discussion reflecting on the content of these first outcomes of KAEBUP. And I would like to warmly welcome the speakers of the roundtable, Alan Chiaratia, if I'm pronouncing that okay, Alan, who is an associate professor of practice at the Department of Urban Planning and Design at the University of Hong Kong, Alberto Riccioni, who is also participating in KAEBUP project, and he's a senior architect at Schetarella Associati in Italy, Alvaro Valera Sosa, who is a team manager, research and development, building health lab in Berlin. Anna Caramondani, who is also participating with us in the project, and she's the director of ALA Planning Partnership in Nicosia in Cyprus. And Saket Saraf, who is the founder and principal of PS Collective in India, and he's a visiting faculty member at the Faculty of Planning, CPT University. So thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and you are today with us. I'll give the floor to Anna and Kristalla for the presentation.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. As Nadia said, I am Kristalla, and we will be presenting along with Anna. Anna, you can say hi if you want.
Hello. I already said hi before, but hi, I'm very excited to be here. So let's do this, Kristalla.
So today we will presenting you the title of the presentation is called Market Opportunities for Evidence-Based Practices, and it we will summarize the main findings of our primary research that we executed in the context of work package 2 of the KAEBUP project. Before going into details about the project, we would like firstly to establish what evidence-based design means. And what we found that is common is that evidence-based design usually utilizes the best information available for research when making design decisions in order to demonstrate a certain kind of improvement, let's say, to the productivity, performance, customer satisfaction, and generally an improvement to the organization. However, the architectural profession has not fully engaged with research knowledge, resources, and processes so far. And this is usually because architecture is considered a process of making, an experimental in nature and a trial and error approach, as learning by doing phenomenon, where the problem and the solution emerge together. So on the other hand, research is usually associated with research activities and is defined as the systematic inquiry whose goal is to achieve communicable knowledge. Therefore, research creates new knowledge in a systematic and rigorous way, and it can be qualitative and quantitative. So these completely different cultures might be the reason practitioners often claim that research does not affect their field of work and perceive research as something different from the design practice. This could be also the reason RIBA argued that all architects they interviewed in a study they did execute research activities even though they don't recognize them as research per se. In particular, architects usually describe research activities as testing, experimenting, or doing innovation, and they viewed research as a separate activity that has dedicated time and resources and goes beyond the scope of the architectural project itself. So the literature review we did of the existing studies suggested that design research can be divided into two broad categories. Firstly, the research activities carried out to inform or evaluate a design project, and it happens during or after the design process. And secondly, all research activities done to gather and evaluate and share information after the completion of a project. So we have research that is executed during the design or the construction or after the completion, and refers to cost occupancy evaluations and general gathering of information about the project as soon as a project is finished. So the first type of research usually gives innovation gains during the design process. So practitioners gain new knowledge, and this offers opens up innovation or gives them new types of information. On the other hand, when the research is executed after the completion of the project and through post-occupancy evaluations, this gives efficiency gains mainly to the firm, and it gives a kind of validation. It operates as a validation process that that examines the project and how successful the project is or not. And that's it gives potentials to the firm to become better, to systematize the process better, and to provide a better knowledge management. What, however, remained unclear from the review of existing literature is the driving forces that promote or hinder the adoption of research into practice. So is what we found that it was missing, and we wanted to investigate further. So the aim of the research we executed was to offer a rigorous understanding of the extent and performance of research-led and evidence-based practices in architecture, planning, and urban design. More specifically, the research aimed to identify the driving forces for executing research into practice, to what extent research is developed by practitioners, and by which means and which depths it is carried out. The methodology proposed for the study offers a crosswalk between types of data, and is mainly twofold. Firstly, we collected questionnaires from 8 firms in the field of architecture, urban design, and planning, and then we executed interviews with four companies, with representatives of those 4 companies. So the different types of data we collected, we analyzed them through statistical analysis, pest and SWOT analysis. The 8 firms that operated as case studies were practices, as I said, in the field of architecture, urban design, and planning. All the 8 firms offered a particularly diverse sample as regards the size of the company, the number of employees, the types of the project they implement, or the scale of the project, and the type of services they offer. In order to select 4 practices for the interviews, we plotted the 8 firms into a 2x2 matrix that simulates the strength of the research activities and the strength of the design activities. We judged the strength was judged qualitatively based on the degree to which each practice performs either design research or promotes design solution without any kind of research. As you can see from the visualization, the majority of practices are situated on those 2 on the right side of the diagram, since the majority of them performs some research activities and design activities. We have a company that is more intuition based, let's say, and other companies that are more consultancy based, so they don't have so many design activities. And based on this categorization, we selected 4 firms, the white ones that you can see here, that we used for the interviews, and in order to give us a more in-depth understanding of the processes, of the struggles they have, and the challenges they face. So let us summarize some of our key findings. The key findings will be divided into 2 sections, let's say. The first section refers to the global scale and global and macro scale of driving forces, and the second refers to the local and micro scale.
Okay. So I'll take over, Cristala, thank you. So on a global level, the driving forces for the adoption of EBD were analyzed through a PEST. A PEST represents the external factors that can affect the operation of a business on a macro level. Anything that happens on a more global scale that might have a significant level of attribution. Governments are a significant factor for the microenvironment. Any taxation, legislation, and regulation can impact greatly the decision-making of an architect to adopt systematic research into practice. Government stability in each country can be associated with the level of risk that a new firm might have when starting a new venture. Business conditions are important for the level of success of any new business. This relates to public motivation and desire to engage in entrepreneurial activities. In economic terms, currently, the low investment in evidence-based design by the public and private sector can present an issue for adopting EBD into practice. Investments by the government and private firms remain low, which can hinder the rate of adoption and slow its growth. Any changes in the global economy and changes in consumer buying power can have significant impact on the market demand, marketability and supply of EBD, and this can either drive it up or down based on the direction of these factors. In social terms, with globalization and changing demographics, we need to consider making our cities healthier and more sustainable while accommodating the needs and growing demands of the increasing population. These are important factors for firms who wish to take part in shaping healthy urban spaces that contribute to the overall well-being. As people become more educated and financially literate, they can better evaluate their choices and develop an understanding and demand for EBD. In technological terms, technology today is transforming the business world, and not only. As R&D is advancing and new startups are being created that offer disruptive solutions, firms, any firm, any practice need to reevaluate their strategy in order to stay competitive and optimize their operation. New trends can prompt firms to invest in better technology to maintain competitive advantage if they wish to remain viable. So, Cristala, do you wish to continue?
Yeah. So on a more micro level, the findings of this research suggest that the driving forces for implementing research into practice are primarily firm profile, client profile, firm priorities, service packaging, firm specialization, research training, external funding, and strategic partnerships. More specifically, in order to go into more depth about in our findings, results suggest that the firm priorities and the extent to which a firm prioritizes the usage of evidence-based design is related with their perception of evidence-based design as a competitive advantage. And at the same time, the more the firm prioritizes research into practice, the more their clients value the importance of research into practice. So here we can understand that the more the firm itself prioritizes the usage of research, the more they use it and the more the clients value this importance. At the same time, external funding seems that is crucial when considering the implementation of research into practice. In order to be more specific, companies that had external funding had also an increased, they tend to use more evidence-based design processes, They perceive evidence-based design as their competitive advantage. They use it very often, and they find it easy to translate research into design guidelines. On the other hand, the factor of time seems that has a negative impact on the implementation of research into practice, especially when the companies mentioned that they lack of time. They were more inclined to adopt a standardized framework for research. What we mean here is that, so the less time they had, the more inclined they were to adopt a standardized framework. The more time they had, the less inclined they were to adopt a standardized framework, because they wanted to be more generic, to customize each research project differently. And the less time they had, the less faith they had that research in design practices promotes creativity, the less inclined they were to adopt research into practice, and the less inclined they were to use a variety of tools in practice. So you can see that the time factor had in fact a negative impact on the implementation of research into practice. On the other hand, training sessions about research seems that determine to a great extent the degree to which the clients value the importance of research into practice. So what we mean here is that the more training the employees had, the more the clients of the firm valued the importance of research into practice. This is expected, since the more training the employees had, the more familiar they were with research practices, and thus the more their clients valued the importance of research into practice. And the easier it was for the employees and for the firm to convince their clients about the importance of research into practice, since they were more familiar with the processes, so they were more they could convince easier their clients about that. What also came out from the interviews is that it was that the firm specialization and the direction that each firm adopts, the service packaging, if the firm includes or not research activities into their service packaging, as well as the client profile and the project type, seems that determine again the extent to which the practice adopts research activities during design or during consultancy. What it appears very predominantly, it was that the size of the firm didn't play a role on the degree to which the companies implemented or not evidence-based design. In other words, either big or small companies implemented research activities into practice, depending on all the other factors that we said earlier. So they might be a small firm, but because it has it integrated into the service packaging, into the firm specialization, is more inclined to implement research into practice.
A useful component, we also conducted how firms could use this for strategic decisions. A useful component of the strategic management is the SWOT analysis, and this regards the business strategy, the company goals, business viability, and competitive advantage. So planning properly and proportionally their capabilities, the capabilities of a firm, it's of great importance. Some of the major opportunities we identify in relation to EBD is being a strategic differentiator and can be a benchmark for quality design. It gives design decisions credibility because it's being backed by scientific evidence. and it helps a company build expertise, and it's increasing the value of their service product, thus making their practice appeal to this target market looking to invest in research-informed design. It can also be considered a major strength since design choices are based on research data, so you avoid risk and scrutiny from making bad decisions during the design cycle. This means better overall design efficiency. So some of the major weaknesses that have been are the collaboration and knowledge management of research data between different departments and teams. The generation of data silos is a major issue that can prevent the proper understanding and management of knowledge. The lack of resources mentioned regards the lack of dynamic capabilities assessment of each practice that can help them effectively carry out research. This was proven to be particularly important regardless of the size of the firm. Assessing those weaknesses can help a business improve and have better organizational success in adopting innovation and understanding the factors that are less favorable or that may present some type of limitation in achieving companies' goals can help plan and create action plan to limit their effect. Threats are more external and on a macro level, therefore understanding their nature and effect on the business can prepare the design practice some of the major threats.
Can't hear you. Okay, you muted for some time. Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry. Let me know if there are any other technical issues. Some of the major threats are the lack of overall policy and the low number of graduates with knowledge on how to implement research into practice. Also, some other aspects regard critical thinking and research skills. So understanding market demand can help offices build better their strategy, because market demand defines the rate of adoption of EBD. It drives supply, which can prompt practitioners to implement EBD in the design process. And also we have come with some recommendations. Now we will see some of the recommendations that can help practices understand the business side of working with evidence-based design and using these as their strategic differentiator. So first, business awareness is vital. Being viable as a business depends on your company goals, business strategy, business model and revenue streams, competitive advantage, and understanding your target market and demand. The first thing that a business needs to do is define its strategy, be clear about the vision and mission of the company, and align these efforts in that direction. It is important for this to be specific about what you do. This helps brands have a special place in the mind of the client, and it indicates how a company differentiates itself from the competition. Second, your competitive advantage is your unique selling point, the value you create for your client that sets you apart. And EBD can become a strategic differentiator, but with the increasing importance of CSR, it will soon constitute a strategic necessity. That's very important. Third, it's important before going an internal transformation or embarking on a new venture journey or creating a spin-off, you need to set clear strategic goals. Define the company dynamic capabilities, which means understand what are the resources that you have in terms of capabilities, knowledge, facilities, methods, anything. And fourth, along with your strategy, you need to avoid variability at the beginning. Start small and adopt new management methods to help you eliminate waste. And with that, we mean excessive time, cost, labor, so that to help you become more efficient, and it will provide you with the best value and the value that you can offer to the customer. So through lean and agile methods, can help you become more efficient and flexible. But most importantly, it allows you to iterate, make meaningful changes easily to the design development. So you can implement information coming from research at any stage of the design. And finally, we need to understand how important it is that innovation coming from research needs to be commercialized. We need more research-based startups that can accelerate and scale social impact. Entrepreneurship is a catalyst for transferring innovation in society. It development with the creation of new venture, and also it helps support and promote marketability of evidence-based design. It encourages experimentation and development of new products and services from research. Also, it helps bridge the gap between lab and market. Entrepreneurship equips people with the skills needed to take innovation from the lab to the market, but most importantly, it's a factor, a major factor in that has to do with the mindset, having the right mindset, thinking big, but starting small, thinking not being afraid to take risks and test ideas. And when you do test these ideas, do it fast so that you can stay ahead of the competition and be relevant to the market demand. So this is all from us. We hope that this has been insightful, informative, and helpful in some ways. This has been a great opportunity working with different partners. It was fun being part of this project and this research. So I hope you enjoyed our small presentation, and thank you so much.
If you have any questions that you want us to clarify, please.
Thank you very much, Cristalla and Anna, for a very insightful and very interesting presentation. Let's give some minutes to the participants if anybody would like to ask any questions, and then we will move to the discussion. I can see that Ilaria would like to ask something.
Yes, I do have a question, but there is one in the chat, so I'll start from that one. I'll read it out. Thank you for your presentation. I'm wondering how we can take into account the sociocultural specificities of the local client base, i.e., what the client base considers as valuable or worthy of compensation, which is a very local issue.
I didn't hear you well, sorry, because outside of my office there are several works.
I will repeat it, but I will repeat it. It's in the chat. It's in the chat as well if you want to read it at the same time.
Yeah, yes, I was about to say that. Yes. Thank you so much, Dimitra. Nice to see you here. I go way back with Dimitra. We were at the University of Nicosia, so nice to see you. Yes, we need to understand. I think I understand the question. It has to do with awareness, and but sometimes because clients lack the understanding and the tools to evaluate their choices, we are given the responsibility to inform them and present them with the best possible choices. When we were having the interviews, Mr. Alberto Rigoni from I cannot say the name, I'm so sorry, Chatatrella. Please correct me in that. Yes, he said something very, thank you so much, and hello. He said something very important that it stayed with me. He said, initially clients may be reluctant into engaging with EBD or commissioning a design that is evidence-based, but when we show them with the scientific research and that they were accepting of that, and eventually they were the ones telling us, we want to do this because this is how it should be done. This gives us better results, and it might not be cheap, but on the long time, in the long run, we will have better ROE, which is return on investment. So, Dimitra, this is a very valid question. Cyprus, things are moving a little slower. Nevertheless, it will take some time adapting. This doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. It means we should be more strategic about it, and today we have different channels to do that, spread awareness, form events, forums, webinars, and etc. The same goes for entrepreneurship, not just in architecture or evidence-based design, in anything. We need and we have the commitment, and we in a way are obliged, or we have the responsibility to inform the public on the importance of entrepreneurship, backing ventures, spreading innovation, and especially the commercialization of research. That is very important. Unfortunately, right now, the legal framework through the government and the university, it's very limiting and restricting when it comes to spin-offs and licensing research, but we believe through our collective efforts, through the different stakeholders and the general ecosystem, research and entrepreneur ecosystem in Cyprus, eventually we will reach our common goals, and these goals it's for everyone. So it's very important to understand that entrepreneurship helps in the creation of jobs and elevates society. It contributes to the quality of life and to the economic development, and EBD plays a greater role in that. I hope I covered you. As for the clients, yes, we need to be more persistent and strategic, educate them, and we start small, slowly. If you can convince 1 or 2 people, that's great. And you know how it happens here. It's a small society, small community, the word of mouth, and that's how it happens.
Okay, thank you, Anna.
I would say we have to start training ourselves first, as we concluded from the research that the training of the staff eventually convince also the clients. So I think we have to start training ourselves.
Thank you, Christella. I think Alan has raised his hand. Alan?
Yes, I would like to come back to one of the slides which was at the beginning, which is about research into design practice. I think
Which one?
I think it's a very early one. I think probably is this one, yeah. So I mean, here you have distinction between kind of like, I think the kind of research in design is classified in 3 aspects. You have 2, which is research for design, and the second one is called research about design. And then there's another one which is kind of intriguing in a way, which is, I mean, you guys are designer and you forget it, is research by design. Okay, this is quite an important one, because at the end of the day, there's a talent of the designer as well that come into it by design, which means that how much or how creative they are in kind of like generating new configuration. because in the way, I mean, research about design is about the relationship between configuration, whatever that mean, I mean, different configuration architecture or in urban design or in product design and so on, and impact, in a way, impact on people, use, and et cetera, et cetera. So I guess, I mean, one of the things, I mean, we can teach research-informed design. We can teach as well research about design, but as well we have to teach about research about design as well, which is kind of, and this come as well, I mean, if you go down the slide, in fact, I mean, you have it somehow. Next slide, or I think the next one. This one, yeah. So in an intriguing way, I mean, if you look at this diagram, so okay, you have like research from left to right, and then up and down you have design. So there is a specialization as well, I mean, in practice, where some practice are very strong in kind of like generating new configuration and very creative in doing that. So I think, I mean, it's important, and this is an intriguing fact, I mean, the way that when designers become kind of social scientists, they forget about design. This is kind of like quite intriguing. Anyway, this is a comment.
Thank you, Alan. I think a very interesting comment, because it's something that we continuously discuss with students. What does research by design mean? But I think what is also interesting, and maybe that will be part of the discussion later on, is how this is communicated to the client. I mean, the value of research by design and the understanding of the client. So maybe we can discuss that as well in the roundtable later on. Thank you, Alan. Anybody else who would like to, Ilaria?
Yes, hello, thank you for the presentation. I was wondering if you were able in your research to disentangle a little bit more the issue of time and the lack of time, which of course relates to cost as a main factor, as a barrier to evidence-based design, because of course, as we know, time is a relative concept. And what is time in this context is the workload of an enterprise in relation to the workforce and you know, the person months that they may have available, and therefore, and there is a profit based on that, on the workload and the price and what it costs them, and their ability to hire new staff, which might decrease the profit, but might increase efficiency in the long term. So I don't know if you were able to disentangle what the respondents meant when they said lack of time, and perhaps this is something to explore in the next stages of the project and in the development of business models. How can the lack of time be addressed in a strategy?
What we found is that they usually set lack of time when they did not integrate the research into their packaging. So they don't have dedicated time for research from the very, very beginning. And they believe that their target clients don't want research. So I think it comes from the very beginning, from the company goals, from the service packaging, from the client profile. So that when the client profile or the target client, they believe that doesn't want research because it will cost too more, it will is not aligned with just the basic architecture, let's say, solution, and they don't want something extra because they don't want to spend extra money. It goes hand in hand with what they mean lack of time.
Maybe I can support a little bit this. When a company or a practitioner becomes strategic, like Cristalla said, you prioritize research, but not just any research. For example, architects have the tendency to do different designs from small to large scale. But if you concentrate your efforts and you say, I'm going to design just this and make it perfect, and you do a specific research and you build upon that and you create a database, then you will invest initially time and money into creating that, but later on it will be easier to access the results of that research, add on and implement it better into your designs. This is and of course this goes to how you price your services, how you price this, but to be able to determine that, you have to test it. So, you know, using entrepreneurial mindset and business model, try it at first. Your ideas, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna try it with few clients and see whether it works. It's like with developing a new product or a software and etc. Of course, design and architecture, it's a little bit because of the nature of it, and it takes longer to be realized, but nevertheless using your resources and efforts strategically, you can still implement some of these ways that are used elsewhere in other industries. So using your capabilities strategically, and when you define what that niche market wants, okay, you can find a way to do research more strategically, eliminate the waste of time in doing other research activity, and you're gonna say, I'm gonna research just this now. So instead of wasting 10 hours or 10 days or 10 years, you will navigate your efforts into very specific direction. I don't know if I covered that.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Tomislav?
Hello, Anna and Cristela, thank you for your presentation and for sharing your research results. I'm sorry I missed the beginning of your lecture, so maybe your presentation, so maybe you answered my question beforehand. I wanted to ask regarding the research itself. What are the, or I think it could be even productive for the roundtable afterwards. What was, based on your research, the sources of the research that is employed in EBD? Specifically, did you have the opportunity to get insight? Do these practices, do these practitioners base their research on their previous academic education? So the research they learned while they were in academia, is it interdisciplinary research? Do they outsource this kind of research for EBD, or is it something that they acquired? Do these practices, is their research methodology something they acquired within their professional practice, you know, lifelong education, specializations, and so on? So what is their basis for implementing EBD in the first place, and what do they base their research methods and practices? Thank you.
I think I'm not sure if we covered that though into the depth that you are saying, but what we found is that the majority of them had a PhD or a research training. They tend to do a lot because there were very big firms. So some of them, they were very, very big firms. So they are well-known firms that they implement evidence-based design. So they have dedicated R&D departments. So I would say that they might tend to collect more employees that they kind of have both qualities. Let's say they do know how to do research, they are architects, so they do have that background. They didn't say a lot about the process because we reached out through questionnaires, so we didn't have that insight. But the most interesting thing from my point of view, it was the training, the trainings about sessions. So they have integrated into the very often training sessions about the research, even though they're familiar with the research practices, even though they might have a PhD, within the firm, they have this particular process. And what was the inclusion exclusion criteria to select the firms? You mean from the clients or for the research to select the firms? We selected 8 firms at the very beginning, global firms that we knew that they might implement research activities, but they wanted also to have a broad spectrum. So implement, use companies that they might implement research activities. They might use an intuition-based practice. They might have an intuition-based practice. They might have a consultancy. So we wanted to cover a broad spectrum of companies in order to understand all the different kinds of activities, or what we said about the service packaging, for example. If we selected just one type of firm, let's say research-based, we couldn't come up to that conclusion that indeed the service packaging plays a crucial role. I don't know if I answered the question.
Thank you, Cristela. Alvaro, I hope this is, Cristela has addressed your question. And I will give the floor to Saket.
Yeah, thanks for the sharing the research. I think it's a very important topic on, why do firms do what they do. So my question is, you selected firms which had more research-based orientation. So were they doing more research-based practice because this is what they wanted to do, or were they doing it because they were responding to the market need and they were filling that gap? And a follow-up thing is, why did firms that don't do research, what are their justifications? So are they saying they don't do research because they can't do research, or because there's no need for research in the marketplace? It's not rewarded well.
I would say it was also a response to the market. For example, the company that didn't implement research activities, as systematically enough to be considered research activities, because they implement research activities. In fact, for example, they collect information about the project, so they do a kind of research during the project, but they don't call it like that. They might don't have it as systematic as other companies. So in that case, it was also a response to the market, because the overall market, the country, and the cultural and social context didn't specify the necessity to have that kind of level of research into practice. So they wanted just, in the general policy, it was to have just basic architectural services. We don't need something more than that. So I think it was, to a certain extent, also the context and the market. But I do believe that they do implement research activities to a great extent, but they might don't manage the knowledge well in order to be considered research. So they have to have a certain kind of knowledge management in order to store this research and make it useful for future steps.
Thank you. I just have a short follow-up question. Did you also come across systematic differences in market that were more open to evidence-based practice than others? So did you find that certain socio-economic, geographic, political things make some market more open to accepting research-based practices than others?
We found through the discussions mainly, because it was through the interviews that we found out that some contexts they were more inclined to who implement in some contents, the firms implemented more evidence-based design than other contexts. And through the discussion, through the interviews, the employees mentioned that in our country, we don't really do that. So it was a kind of, yeah, so they don't have a tradition, let's say, of doing this.
So it's kind of the trajectory. If they don't have a tradition, there's a much more resistance to adopt.
Exactly.
I just want to add to what Kristalla said, and to support it, Kristalla, I think she covered it. We identify that in certain geographical regions that are more wealthy, or the type of projects, whether it's government funded or a private project, there can be a demand for evidence-based design. So if a project is sponsored by the government, they also are more inclined to commission more and invest in such designs. Whereas in some European countries, this doesn't happen due to the economic crisis, the consumer purchasing power. So they consider that to be as something more luxury or more expensive, and there is no great demand for it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna and Kristalla, for the responses. If we don't have any other comments or questions, okay, thank you. We can stop sharing them. And
thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the presentation and for the very interesting discussion that followed. And I think we can take that on and continue with a discussion between our speakers. Saket, Alan, Alvaro, Alberto, and Anna. Is Anna with us?
I'm here. I'm here. Hi.
Hi, Anna. So if you would like to, I don't know if it's possible to have your cameras on. So you can sort of start. Hi, Alberto. Nice to see you again.
Well, my camera is about my camera. It's difficult for me.
Okay, now we can see you, Anna.
You see a shadow. It's okay.
We can see your profile.
That's great.
Okay, so we can then move on to the discussion. I mean, the idea for this roundtable is that we have two issues that we would like to sort of initiate the discussion. I'll start with the first one, and we will have about 4 minutes each, the presenters, to respond. And then when we finish with that, we can have a further discussion with all the participants. So the first issue that was of interest to us, and we would like you to respond to, is first of all to share with us your own experience and the challenges that probably you may have faced of either practicing or teaching evidence-based design, and also, if possible, to elaborate on the way in which you might communicate how research findings relate to shaping design choices, either to your clients or to students. I will start from the left as I see it on my screen. So I will start with Saket, if you would like to respond on this issue for 4 minutes, roughly.
Yeah, thanks, Nadia. I spend my time partly teaching and part practice. I would kind of divide my answer for both the topics. I think in practice, what I have found most important is communicating the value of evidence-based practice to the clients. And once they see that value, the strategies vary. How do you communicate that depending on the client, depending on the project, and number of other factors. But once you're able to communicate that value, I think that's the first, and I think the single largest win for the project to kind of use evidence-based practice, right? And one of the things that I do that is how to show them how the evidence-based practice can really bring in solutions which are very contextual and specific, rather than grandiose, broad-based suggestions in planning and design, which everybody talks about, but they are too generic to make a difference in the process. Right? So I would stress on the fact that you start with communicating value to the client, show that how evidence-based practice brings in more transparency, accountability, credibility, and opportunities for engagement. And that is something that, again, clients have found respond to very well, that they feel part of the process, because now they can logically question and see how decisions are made, and they can see points of agreement or disagreement, which is very different from an intuition-based approach, where the clients often find it difficult to engage in the decision-making process, right? So these are some of the things on the practice side. What I've also found is, and I think Christina and also she said, that in different markets, there's a different resistance and different appetite for using some of these evidence-based things. And of course, things are changing very fast. And I'm seeing the change much faster in working with policymakers and government. They have shown much more inclination to accept evidence-based design. And also, I think because it comes with a lot of extra transparency and credibility, right? So it's easier for them also to communicate to the wider stakeholders on why certain decisions in the projects were made and what is it supported by. So that's on the practice side. On the teaching side, I teach a course on topics related to evidence-based design every semester. And I think with the students, what I've found is, if you are able to motivate them about the value that evidence-based practice brings, I think, again, that is where you win the battle. Once they see that value, once you show them that, look, there are great designers and practitioners, and what they're able to do after years of practice and the intuition that they have developed, some of it can be codified using good design research-based methods. And if you do the evidence-based approach, then you need not wait for 10, 20, 30 years to develop that intuition. You can use some of the knowledge over the last years which have been codified, right? And also add to it. So I think that is one of the points which I find resonates well with the students. But also at the same time, we should, I see that students, not all students are same kind, right? So clearly, as practitioners, some students also work more with the intuition-based approach, and some are more analytical in their perspective. So while teaching, I try to kind of strive this balance between methods and intuition, where intuition is something that I try to make sure that all the students develop towards appreciating evidence-based design. And then those who are more analytically inclined, they spend more energy in developing the methods and getting their hands really dirty and getting into the nuts and bolts of the thing. Right, so I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you very much, Zakir. Alan?
Okay. Well, just to, it happened that I was a director and a board director at Space Syntax. So, that's a company I think you've been kind of like investigating. What I think is important, and then I move into kind of teaching and academic work and research. And the kind of like the change from working for a company which was focused on one particular aspect of urban design, which is layout in a way and particular technique. It was quite interesting because in a way urban design is much more broader than just layout, for example. So when I went into teaching, I inherited a sort of studio which was called research-based design. In fact, we rename it, we call it research-informed urban design, and we've been kind of like working with that studio for the last 10 years to kind of like try to make it work. And it's quite an interesting experience to kind of like aim to teach research and form urban design, where there's two parts. The students have a research-based project, which is kind of quite fast in a way, and lead back to the issue of time. So in a way, the students have 20 weeks to produce a piece of research, and that's often as well. That's often the question for practice is like some projects, I mean, in this part of the world, which I'm based in Hong Kong and in China, they last 3 months and they 12 weeks or 14 weeks, and they are very fast. It can be a master plan for a few square kilometers to very large kind of things in a way, more than that. So the question is like, how do you kind of do research in such a short time as well, which is valid and so on. And as well, the other intriguing part is that that knowledge in the urban design process or in any design process doesn't come orderly. You don't always have what you need to know at the beginning, or and then sometimes you have a process which is kind of intriguing, but I mean sometimes information come right in the middle and then change completely what you have to do and so on. So that's kind of like about the experience and in consulting about evidence-based design and practicing and teaching in a way evidence-based design, although we don't talk about it that way. Now, I mean, I think, I will completely agree that, I mean, there's a question of value. So we wrote a paper based on this experience a while ago, which is called The Value of Urban Design, a Studio Approach. And we frame value around three kind of like around the value in exchange, the value in use, and the value in common or moral value in a way, which is interesting. The last one is interesting because urban design is often within about value in common that impact, I mean, value in use and value in exchange in a way. So we adapted a framework from David Graeber, which wrote a book about the anthropology of value. It's quite an interesting book because somehow it provides a sort of universal background. It seems that every society has those three values: value in exchange, value well, as net benefit, value in use or a meaningful difference, and moral value or value in common in a way. So we use that framing for teaching. And it's true that, I mean, in a way, I mean, I would say more than kind of using the kind of term of evidence-based project, and we use more like and then insist on the student be able to kind of elaborate on the values they create by their design. So that's quite an important way of producing value is a goal of the project to design. How you do that? It is an intriguing way in a way. How do you do that? I mean, there's many ways. Well, research informed design is one. Research by design another one, and research about design another one. And depending on the project, I mean, in a way, the designer always kind of like use a mix of those three things in a way. So that's a little bit of framework that we use for client and student. We've been working with practice as well. So we did a little tool which is called a value graph map. So which was to eliciting when you have like many stakeholders and you have in a fast project, you may not have much time to do research as well, but still you can align, you can find out what the stakeholder believe is the value, and sort of crowdsourcing value of urban design in that case. And so that at least enable the designer to be fast on track on a brief. There is something called, maybe you may be aware of it, which is called the McLamy value curve. In fact, I mean, designer add value at the very, very early stage of the design process. because after, I mean, there's many people involved and it's very difficult to kind of change the design and so on. So, and that's an intriguing thing about design process. It's like the beginning is like when there's not much time, there's not much money, and I mean, that's where the designer add much more value. So there's a bit of paradox there. Even if you take, for example, the IBA design stage, when you do preliminary study, I mean, you don't have much fee, and then usually, I mean, the client is not there to kind of like wanting to give you so much more fee. And this is an intriguing aspect as well. Space Syntax was working with Foster and Partner. I think this is one of the companies you have interviewed as well. And they move, intriguingly enough, I mean, they had a long time ago, they have kind of like that. They were having a lot of consultants to inform their project. They were quite expensive because they were using consultants that were doing research. And bit by bit, they integrated all those research. So now they have a service team that provide internal research to their designer. And that's an interesting, in your diagram, Foster and Partners, they kind of like are very high on both research and design in a way. So it's quite an interesting model as well. But they are relatively big, but I mean, at certain times they were quite different. So I would stop here because I think, I mean, sort of exceed my time maybe.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan. Very interesting insight. Can we move to Anna?
Oh, I'm sorry, I just had to sign something very urgent at my work, but okay, that's all. In our practice, we don't have, we're a very small firm, and we're usually dealing with small studies like traffic impact studies and clients who are in a hurry. So time and cost is very, very important to us. And we do not have a lot of experience in evidence-based design, but we do understand that in a lot of our studies, this is lacking in our practice. For instance, we want to use sustainable urban indicators to do our traffic impact studies. We want to argue in favor of our clients with government departments that the rates they use for transport traffic increase, for instance, is unrealistic if you know what sustainable mobility is. And we don't have the data to prove it to them. We try and research to do some international research. Unfortunately, Cyprus is a small country, and the university in Cyprus is quite young, university life as such. And especially in urban planning, there is not much research in Cyprus where we can, turn to use in our design. But surprisingly, we also do some research by design because we find we use some of our older studies and some of the findings in our newer designs to support our designs. For instance, if we do designs for shopping malls or trip generation from shopping malls, we cannot base it on evidence-based in Cyprus. We use other indicators which are not valid for Cyprus because Cypriots have different behavioral tendencies. So we do understand that it is lacking. I would like to go more into this to help our business, but lack of funds, and sometimes we try to get in European projects like this. This is a great opportunity for us to gain knowledge. We cannot compete, with big universities in big proposals. So we stay somehow in stalemate in our practices, and I'm trying to tell to our staff to try and do some training, and so that we can create opportunities, as you said, for our firm. But mostly, as Ilaria or someone said, in our firms, profit and person months allocated is very important. But we do think of creating new goals, or getting younger staff where, for instance, I got into this project because we hired a younger very bright young man just came from university and gave us a lot of new ideas. So this is something we are thinking of. And I hope that in Cyprus universities will create some research for us, evidence-based research, and create a data pool for us with indicators where we can exchange, use and exchange views. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for the interesting insights and for highlighting this need of collaboration between universities and practices, which is partly aim of this project as well. Let's hear Alvaro's position. Alvaro?
Yes, hi. Oh, thank you, Nadia, for the invitation and the great presentation we had earlier. So, well, I'm going to talk a little bit about evidence-based design from kind of like my personal experience practicing in hospital design. That was basically where I started. Perhaps we were doing it without even knowing what evidence-based design was, and we bumped into the term later on. So in hospital design, you really have to gather a lot of data and prove managers that you're doing the right thing and that every detail, every design intention has a purpose. So that's why I think that that was part of the training without acknowledging that it was a process, which was systematic, by the way. And so that was from 2007 to 2010, 11. And then I started practicing or doing research at the university at TU Berlin at a very specific department, which is the Architecture for Health department of TU Berlin. And there, well, it was not only about facility design, we also developed urban design and looking into urban health. So that was equally important to bring the arguments and to feed what the design would be. And well, I think the challenge both for students and for perhaps convincing team partners or other collaborators to get in the wheel of designing or making an intervention was to explain or for us to understand what is evidence-based design. So at some point, I developed a little scheme, a little sketch, which I've shared to everyone there. It's a JPEG where there's I would say it's following the systematic process or the scientific process and understanding what is the process that we have in design, which is circular, which is iterative, which we always ask questions, the project never ends. And so we have certainly some kind of evaluation to that, which is very much different to the one that we have in public health, for example, which afterwards I did a master in public health, so I understood better what kind of tools had to be honed or tuned for evidence-based design. So the conclusion of all this like process with partners and so on at the university was that we would have to differ what evidence-based design is to what evidence-based design research is, and also prepare tools for evidence-based design research which could be proper for engaging in that process, in that development process. So I hope this helps a little bit to understand what the challenge is, communicating what is this field within the profession. And for students, particularly, it was very challenging to convince them that in one semester they had to employ 2/3 of their time in research and gathering data and consolidating that data. And they really wanted to jump into design right away. Well, you know, sketching out possible solutions without really understanding what the problem was. So the needs assessment, the problem assessment, that is particularly difficult for students, for design students to engage with. And I think one has to be very creative and find ways of making it appealing, sexy for students, so that they can then rush but very confidently into the design process. So in my experience into especially in the last 4 years as in teaching, we had a course which was the Lehrforschungsprojekt, which is a project for research, academic research, and so. And what my experience there was that the design part of this subject rendered very, very good results. Very good results in comparison to the students that were not engaging in that 2/3 of the research part of the semester. So they were comparable. I mean, if in terms of expression, in terms of the models that we made, in terms of what a project requires for a presentation. But then when the students were talking about the project in terms of outcomes, about possible outcomes, and what kind of design outputs or possibilities there were, they were far better, of course, than those students that were not so informed from the beginning. So the initial effort did pay off very well academically, and it was quite important. It was quite important to strengthen that path. Now I'm talking exclusively about healthcare design, where outputs and health outcomes are very important and measurable, and that you have to build these arguments very, very well to convince authorities then in practice or hospital managers to adopt this or that measure. How does this translate in other fields of practice that are not healthcare design? Well, thanks to Corona times, maybe, there's more, I would say, interest in urban health. There's more interest in salutogenic designs out of the hospital design realm. So it is called the new sustainability, health, the new sustainability. So we're taking a little bit, the stage from green technologies and green developments and all that. So I think we're side by side with climate designers and so in bringing the right arguments into implementation. So we really have to feed them, to argue them very well, and in order to sell them. So it's I think we're in the right track now. What is important, again, and with that I would finish this part, is to tailor much better and to make the tools, I would say, easier to adopt. And for that, I don't want to say that they're going to be universal toolkits. No, they are context specific. So it depends on projects more than on this or that kind of methodology. I would like to retake something about the presentation earlier made about that research, which I find super interesting, and it comes to the question of of how you selected the companies and so on to participate in this and to gather the information. For perhaps in a different stage, I don't know how your research is ongoing and what steps are coming next, but I think that it would be interesting to know or to assess the information or the development phases by projects and not by companies. So taking projects and analyzing what these projects meant to be and what kind of outputs or outcomes they had afterwards is, I think, it's closer to what evidence-based design research would be interested in, or would be helpful for us, at least. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you, Alvaro. And we move to Alberto.
Well, yeah, if I have to speak about my experience, our experience, I work for film, so my experience, I mean, making with my team, so it's a shared. The first thing I want to point out is that, in my experience, the evidence-based design, if you have to talk about the evidence-based design, we have first of all to say something obvious, that the project is made of unique inputs, unique is a combination of needs, constraints, and about the location from the client, from the neighborhood, from the environment, from the historical location. So each one of these topics deserves a research, would deserve a deep research, and that is something that we usually try to do in our projects, to make a research on each aspect of the project. But all the different aspects are not all the same. For some aspects, it's easy to make a research. It's easy to share this research with the client, to let understand to the client the importance of this research, and to find the evidences that can help you in the design. For other topics, is more difficult. That is for many reasons, but it's not what I want to point out. In my experience, I'd like to share to go in deep in one example to let you understand what I mean. And the example is taken from the project that we shared as a case study for KAEBUP, which is the building for the Municipality and Rural Affairs Ministry of Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. In that project, the three main aspects that we went to understand with the research, deep research, were the environment, the bioclimatic aspect, because in Saudi Arabia it's a very important issue. The use of the building, it was an office for thousands of people, so to understand all the flows of the people was something that requested a deep research. And finally, the historical references, because it's an institutional project in which the references to the historical architecture was something important. So we made a research on this aspect. These three aspects, there are more topics, but I go to these three because I want to summarize. Leading to one point that was common for the three, which is the use of the spaces in Saudi architecture. We found out that in historical architecture, the Saudi buildings, mainly the Najd building, which are from the region of Riyadh, used to the volumes of the buildings goes from very narrow spaces and then enlargement in mixed spaces, and that is what was something that we wanted to put in our project, like one of the references to the historical buildings. This aspect was something that was also very in line with our researches on the bioclimatic part of our research, because we found out that it was very good to create a Venturi effect for the movement of the air, for the flow of the air for refreshment. And so we, from our two researches, to make it simple, we found this design of the volumes that would help us in both these aspects. But it was completely contrary to all the researches made on the flows of people, because you can understand that if you make narrow spaces, then large spaces, and you want to move thousands of people arriving at the same time at 8 in the morning to go to work, it makes a strange effect of people are in line, then people spread around. So what I want to say with this, that I don't know if I want to say something, just to share my experience, but it's just to say that the evidence-based design is something very useful and something that we always try to use and to share with our client and to let them understand how important it is to start from evidences and from studies. And when we don't have studies already done, we try to make our own studies. But it's something that used in a complex project in which you have to move on many different evidences in many different fields. It is also very important to for the designer to understand how to manage these different inputs. I cannot say that we use the evidence-based design to shape our to give shape our design. We use it as an instrument to understand all the aspects of the design. But at the end, the designer is the one who has to understand how to use these inputs and how to manage them. And I think it's also what the client wants from a designer. Working in this way, we never had particular difficulties in that understand that the client understand our how we move in research, how we the time we need to make some researches to understand some aspects of the project, because it's always something functional to the best result, and I think the client usually understands it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alberto. I think it's very interesting to see the view of practicing company and the views of people who teach as well and who are involved in evidence-based research. And I think there are a number of issues highlighted, but maybe we can discuss this after we address the second issue, which is a step forward that the one we discussed, which basically aims we aim to hear your own reflection on a question that has been arising frequently when we were doing this research. Okay, in the health department, yes, it has been used widely, I would say, more than in other studies. It's been discussed a lot, evidence-based design during the past years, but we're coming across people discussing most of the time that even if it is discussed, even if it's used, it is not widely used and systematically. And we would like to hear your own reflection on reasons or challenges that EBD faces and maybe explains why it's not used as widely and systematically. So I will start a bit randomly now. Let's start with Alan, and then we move to the rest. Let's hear your reflection on why you think that EBD is not used as widely.
There's many reasons. Well, one of them, for example, I think, is been touched upon is, in fact, regulation, standard, etc., can be way behind what we know today. That's one very important point. For example, I'll just give an example. In the UK, there were a guideline, a design guideline, which is called DB32, I think, which was done in 1970s, which was regulating all the road kind of design and everything. It took 50 years to repeal it. Okay, so because once the regulation is in place, there's a whole system that kind of arise around it. There's like a methodology, there's kind of like knowledge, there's all those things that kind of like really embed that regulation in the way where things are done. There's like engineering company and so on and so forth. And it took, I mean, first of all, it took, so it took a long time to kind of like get rid of these things. So this is one key aspect as well. So that's one part. But it's an important part thing about changing regulation and standard. The government is, I mean, very slow at it sometimes and so on. But at the same time, they cannot change it all the time because, I mean, unless, I mean, we change completely, we go toward what is called a performance-based kind of like standard and regulation. But that requires sometimes discretionary judgment. And that's what the government doesn't want in a way that, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, the decision is made by somebody discretionarily in a way. They want to achieve a certain level of degree of performance whatsoever. And that may happen as well, for example, in China or in this part of the world. I mean, standards are a good way, an efficient way to get things done fast. I mean, with a minimum kind of quality and so on and so forth. So that's very important to realize. Two, I think, I mean, something we have not talked about is a little bit the elephant in the room. Knowledge is power, and knowledge is kind of like money somehow, which is to say that, I mean, this is what you're selling. So I'm not sure that, I mean, the fact that we don't see it explicitly doesn't mean that it's not done or kind of like, but they won't share it because, I mean, that's what makes their value. I mean, if I'm, that's why, for example, I mean, the way, I mean, Foster and Partner, I've integrated all of, I mean, a lot of the consultants that we're using, because then they can kind of like fully, I would say, control the value they're creating. That's quite important as well. So we are, in a way, the cost, I mean, it's been talked about, the cost of information is important as well. It's costly to kind of create knowledge sometimes. This is an important aspect of why, I mean, sometimes, I mean, it's so costly that no office can do it, or no designer can do it. And then, I mean, I will come to, okay, so that's an important part. Another one is like, not everything that is measured is important, and not what is important is measurable. So I think, I mean, that's very important. And then we have to move away a little bit from a naive idea of evidence-based design. Sometimes there's values that are shared, and there's by society, and there's maybe evidence or may not be evidence, and that will be implemented because, I mean, that's a value that is shared. So it may have a detrimental effect, but that's a culture and that's the way it is. So, I mean, that's our three areas, I think, that are quite important to keep in mind in a way. So it might be, because I believe that every design process have a level of information which take place in a way, kind of like what we call research for design, which is quite different than research about design. So, I mean, I would give credit to designers that all of them do a certain level of research for design, and then some of them do research by design as well. And the question about, I mean, trying out, and then there's a limit. There's a limit of research as well. I mean, I think that's quite important. It might be a mismatch between the scope and character of problem of urban designer and practitioner, and the form of research that has been conducted so far. So this is quite an important aspect in a way. Then, I mean, there is access to research. Which is to say, I mean, there's a lot of research out there, but I mean, sometimes it's behind wall. It's not formatted in a way that, I mean, practitioner can understand them. So it's difficult for, and then, I mean, the big thing is like, I mean, with the explosion of research, there's so much. In fact, I mean, there's so much research out there. And then how do I know which one is kind of credible? Sometimes it's very difficult to read. And I don't know the magnitude as a designer. I mean, it's like, I mean, everybody's claim, I mean, every research paper is saying, I'm important, but how important are you? I mean, what I tell my students is like, you want to have something that gives you 70% of what you can achieve in a way. After, I mean, if you take too much, I mean, you don't have time most of the time. So it's kind of like, and then there's different domain. There's like, I mean, in urban design, there's for example, landscape. Okay, that's quite important, and greening and all these kind of things. How policy come on a way to it. How, I mean, it's quite amazing how the policy I give an example of how long it takes for research to go from a research result, and then what does it mean, and then to become a policy, and then that policy then is implemented, and design start to kind of take account of that policy and regulation in a way. So this is a case of, for example, the green space regulation policy that is in London. The study was done in the 60s, 70s. The policy emerged in the 80s or something like that, and it started to be implemented in 2000 or something like that. So I mean, you can see the kind of the cycle, and that's kind of quite a long. And then since it's been implemented, it hasn't been reviewed. So we are kind of quite. I mean, in the last 21 years, in a way, the London has kind of implemented that policy, moving from a standard square meter per person to something which is much more sophisticated and based on how people were using a green space and so on. Quite a sort of behavior based, instead of a rational way of thinking about how much space people need, and so on. But having said that, one could say as well that every research, in a way, especially in design, is context specific in a way. So, and that's a little bit against what research is meant to do, which is and that's the tension that the researcher kind of face. And that's maybe why designer have to do more research, but it's not that easy. Is that, in general, good research is what is general, because we base the research on the idea of a little bit like research in physics, where you try to kind of reach universality. But in urban design, you want to achieve a distinctiveness, something which is unique, because each place is unique and so on and so forth. So how do we kind of reconcile? How do we do science of the unique? That doesn't sound like science to me, but it is. It could be as well. I mean, there's something about, I would say, the fact that places are cultural as well. It's not, just, as an effect of configuration on one side and people being universal. So people have adaptation. For example, I give you a typical example, which is in London, pretty flat. People don't like going up and down, and it's quite famous. Some area which are multi-level are very kind of difficult to navigate. Now take this things to Hong Kong, where people are using all their environments up and down, and kind of because the topography to begin with, and because they develop a sort of configuration which is completely quite different in a way. When people talk about flatness, they mean going down one level below or going up one level is still flat. So then, we have a context sensitive. We have to realize that we have to make context sensitive research, which is kind of a little bit paradoxical in a way in what research might be. But maybe we're moving toward that, which is recognizing that in fact, there is broad kind of difference between, let's say, the US or Europe or this side of the world, where, for example, density are very different, and so on and so forth. So I'm a little bit more, how to say, both optimistic about, maybe it's not, I wouldn't call evidence-based design. I would call about, researching the value of design in a way, because it's, those value are, those who are, I mentioned about value in exchange, value in use, and value in common are truly universal. Every society has those. And so it's a good base to kind of start. You have the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goal as well. And yes, we have to recognize the limit of it, and we have to recognize, the time kind of thing. But I think there is, and it takes time, as well, to change things. Yeah, it's quite difficult. Anyway, so there's a few things to think about. But the government regulation and standard, sometimes they are, harder than wall to take down. Those are really difficult to kind of change in a way. We have standard in Hong Kong, which haven't changed for, well, same than in Hong Kong, same than probably everywhere in the world in a way. Those things are very difficult to change.
Okay, great. Many challenges to EBD.
Yes.
Thank you, Alan. Sakit, would you like to take it on from here?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, thanks, Maria. So I will just pick one thread that Alan mentioned, the dichotomy between, say, research, which is about generalization, and practice, which is about specificity. Right? I just want to add one more thread to that, that research is always about doing more and more of less and less things. And practice in projects, it's always less about more things. So in any practice, I work more in like urban design, urban planning area. So there the project briefs about more and more issues, even if they do less and less about each of them, right? And therefore bringing research in such kind of a thing becomes problematic, because you would find evidence-based methods and practices for each subset, but it's very difficult to have something that ties all the different verticals together, right? So that comes another challenge of bringing evidence-based and research-based methods into a complex project. Second reason why I think the uptake is not huge is that if you look at the, I'm not talking about people in this call, but in general, the current generation of designers and planners, they didn't have too much exposure to the data and the tool and the method that we take for granted. So if you see the practice, which is largely driven by and done by people who are kind of trained much before us, right? Only a small section of they are skilled and are able to do this. So whereas all the decision makers from the client side and especially in big firms, the principal investigators, they might not feel comfortable with this evidence-based approach to a large extent, more because of their formal training. So I think these are the two things from the market side which are not encouraging a lot of evidence-based thing to the extent it deserves. But I strongly feel that within our community, and by our community, I mean people who are doing applied research in or doing research to support evidence-based practices, a lot of work has to be done by people who are researching here. And one of the biggest thing is that the chasm, the gap between what we do from in research, the analysis we do with the data, and the useful insight that it can generate, that gap is huge. So if you just survey a lot of research work, more quantitative research work, a lot of nice analysis, but what percent of that analysis translates to a useful insight that adds value to the project? And that is a huge gap. And I think that responsibility lies on us to say, how do we bridge that gap? How do we make the analysis more useful and not doing analysis which is good for its own sake, right? So I think that is a huge bridge that we really need to gap that we need to bridge. Second thing is, again, onus is on us that we have a battery of tools and suits and data and methods which don't talk to each other seamlessly, right? So the tools, different tools would use different formats. The data cannot translate, so output from one tool would not go seamlessly into something else. These things are improving, but still the whole pipeline of way different verticals can be organized into a seamless thing, which is required in a practice setting, may not be required in a university setting where you're just very narrowly looking at one issue. But in practice setting, you need to be very quickly look at, say, walkability and immediately connect it to real estate prices and immediately connect it to something else, number of ridership on a thing. And what you will find as practitioners, you would have different tools doing different things, right? And moving seamlessly between these tools become very challenging, increasing the project time and the effort and the cost, and involving different experts. Again, in a project setting, that becomes difficult. That one person would come and do walkability, and the second person would do some other thing, and third person will do some other thing, and all their toolkits and all their data formats, they would not talk to each other, right? And so that makes it a big challenging, that even if we know how these things work, we don't have a system to have an easy information flow between all these things which ultimately matter on the ground. And I think we need to kind of very quickly start becoming more multidisciplinary, look beyond the physical realm of streets and buildings, and have more people from business, from sociology, from anthropology, and environment coming and talking to us more often, and expand our toolkit to involve them, right? And I think that we have been kind of slow on that part. And my last point is, of course, embracing more of the new age data, big data, machine learning things into what we do, because the way we are now interfacing with reality has changed drastically, whereas we are still hanging on to tools and methods which were developed a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades ago. We are still trying to perfect that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Saket. I think your previous comment also relates to a comment that Tomislav wrote in the chat in relation to the areas, disciplines that employ research and evidence-based design that we can come back to later, maybe. And let's move on to Alberto and hear his reflections on that.
Yeah, actually, I don't know if I have an answer to this question. I thought about this. I don't think actually that the evidence-based design is not widely used. I think it is, even if probably it is not used always properly, and even if it is used only in some fields, on some topics, on some issues, not for everything. For sure, it is not systematically used. Why this? I don't know why. In my opinion, it's mainly for economical reasons. To approach to a project starting from research is always something that needs time, needs economical effort, needs so it is something that sometimes or very often unlikely is considered not convenient, except for some topics. Just to make a very simple example, if we consider the bioclimatic aspect, the comfort aspect of the project, I think if we talk about the energy consumption, the save of energy, it is something that worldwide is starts from the research, starts from the studies, and each designer in this project start from the research to understand how to approach this issue. And this is something that has a good result also for comfort and for the human being. But if we talk about, for example, the comfort given by the color of the walls, that is something on which there are many researches, and is considered something not very interesting. I think just because it's something that gives comfort but doesn't have a real effect on an economical issue. This is from the client point of view, for sure. This is also for the building point of view and the life of building. I don't know. I think the effort is in the future will be to make everybody understand how the research is important in each aspect of the in my case of architecture, but I mean of the project, or every kind of project. Because as I said, I think that in some fields, in some topics, it is understood. In many others, it isn't.
Okay, thank you very much, Alberto. Alvaro?
Well, I think most of my points were covered previously, but I'll try to be precise with a few left. Well, I think that terms and terminology is within communication has to be improved in order to get this across different disciplines and areas of specialization, and that leads to a transdisciplinarity problem. We've heard here about being more multidisciplinary, maybe interdisciplinary, but I think the question is to make evidence-based design research and evidence-based design as a product of design more popular, is to bring stakeholders early in the process, and to have everyone to be able to have a say and to participate. So transdisciplinarity from A to Z, from the problem assessment, from understanding context very well, and so on, which most of us intuitively do it anyhow in the project, but to be more inclusive in that aspect. Then I think that would be very effective to spread out what evidence-based design would be as a project. Then there's another point which Alain pointed out, which was about knowledge sharing. I think that open source possibilities, or the data gathering within a team, has to be open source, and because then you really gather that transdisciplinary approach in a more effective way. You polish very well your concept, and well, it makes it more popular across the audience, or the users, which potentially are going to end up enjoying the project, or taking the benefits from the project. So it was mentioned that, for example, big companies like Foster or many others, I mean, they keep their kind of like knowledge safe, because they don't want to give it out for free. Well, it takes a lot of effort and money to create a database, of course. But you see other companies like Tesla, which is betting hardly on that, and they definitely get the benefits from it. So I think there's an audience there that could contribute, and that's I mean, free workforce for your project. So make it open source. I already talked about science and communication. Well, I think the other effort is to breaking down very complex and complicated terms. Again, I'm going to the communicational thing, to make it easy to understand your findings, the data analysis. The data analysis, the results of that are very complex now, and so it could be translated, or there could be kind of like an effort there in making it easier to access. Transparency would be another aspect. I don't know of any architects or building designers that are open to say, well, my project failed. This is what happened, you know? I did really bad here, and so don't do it, please. Well, that's not very good for your business. So there has to be a way of assessing these issues and knowing what happened in the process and being pretty open about it. And again, that leads to open source. I mean, if everyone participates, well, everyone is accountable, not only the architect and the building designer. So everyone has a stake on that. And so it's easier to reflect on what happened, what went wrong, so we could, in the next iteration, we could do it better. And going towards policy, there's a big effort into including health in all policies. That's an initiative from WHO. And so in paper, it sounds really good. It's okay, health in all policies. Wow, I mean, and education, and, you know, water preservation and other resources, you know, policy, it has to be health driven and so on. but what is it? Most people don't know what it is. And especially, you know, we are in an area in hospital design that we should know better what health and all policies is. And it's somehow very complex and complicated to understand, to grasp what it is. So I think that has to be somehow broken down into aspects that we can digest better. And that goes through understanding that how we shape the physical environment has consequences on health. So to study better these correlations, to get people from public health involved in architectural offices, in planning offices, I think from now on, I think that every architectural office should have a public health researcher by default. And then we could be talking about health in all policies, at least from the urban development or point of view, and regarding all these issues, which is a very strong industry. So I think the construction or development industry could take the lead in showing what health in all policies is about. Yeah, those are my considerations.
Thank you very much, Alvaro. Anna, last but not least.
Hi, everybody. Not being part of academia is my weakness, but maybe my strength in some cases. I have been mostly covered by previous speakers, but I would like to point out what Alan has said about the big elephant in the room, that I have just thought about it. Why couldn't we get, knowledge from other similar firms that have done work similar to us? And Alan is correct that firms, I don't know, they just, because of the competitiveness in the market, they just don't want to share it. And that's one of the biggest problems. Someone has said that maybe Foster could sell it, for instance. I have not thought about that. That's something that could be, but to have the open source idea for competitive firms is not so easy to achieve. This is my opinion. And the other thing is that as small firms, we do produce research through our even small designs. Sometimes we cannot share it due to lack of knowledge management procedures. So this is something that should be looked at. I cannot really add any more to what everybody else has said who has more experience in academia than me, but just consider this from a practitioner. The competitiveness is an issue. That's all I have to say, Nadia.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you very much all for very interesting insights and the very interesting sort of discussion. I mean, personally, I was thinking when I was listening to the positions of everybody that, at least for us who are in academia, I mean, I think it's also a big challenge how you educate future shapers of the built environment to work in this mindset. And because we talked mostly about what is happening now in firms and EBD, but I think a bigger challenge for us is also how this is incorporated in the curriculum, which most of the times is, at least from our experience, is only fragmentally sort of implemented, and it doesn't happen very, very often. There are some courses in the curriculum dedicated to these issues, but they're quite fragmented. It's not something that students sort of develop in. So I think that's an additional challenge, that you develop the mentality from the education stage, moving on then to practice. So thank you very much for your position. Would somebody like to ask anything? Cristela or Anna maybe, or Ilaria, or the rest of the participants?
I believe I'm covered. I don't have any questions. I apologize. I missed a few things because we are having some issues here at work. It was very interesting for me to hear the different perspectives and insights, concerns, in general, the discussion. So thank you for being part of that.
Thank you, Anna.
I think there's a couple of comments in.
Sorry, go on, Ilaria.
There's a couple of comments in the chat. One was mentioned, there was one from Jason mentioning that there is a big question about positive evidence versus post-positive evidence. I don't know, Jason, if you're there, if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, thank you. It's something that's always been at the forefront of the discussion when we start talking about people, is that they tend not to be reliable sources of data in the way that we would, balance and discuss, the same way we would look at something on the climate, question, or maybe something a little closer to the human aspect, in healthcare, where you can work with some real obvious, data points that contribute to, control of infectious diseases and such. That those kinds of data points are very clear. But when particularly we get into the urban design environment, and even more so actually when we work with architecture, in the practice, there becomes a real reliability gap when we have to go into the post-positive, which is where the work is happening. That's an important point, is that we need to be able to work with post-positive evidence, even though it may not be, eminently transferable to another context. How else can we, even begin?
Thank you, Jason. Would anybody like to reflect on this comment? Alvaro?
Yeah, Jason, it's a really good point, and I think that starting from the healthcare design perspective that you mentioned, that we do have, right, hard, let's say, measurement points to design better. If we translate that to neighborhood planning, for example, and we could scan through a neighborhood or evaluate a neighborhood to improve, for instance, walkability. Well, I think that wandering around the neighborhood and asking questions like, what would you like, or what's your vision about this neighborhood, is not very helpful for the project. I think it would be more about going after those hard facts, and that we're trying to translate from hospital design, from these processes, to see how we could really get hard facts and not so many soft ones. And it breaks down pretty, I would say, not easily, but more understandable if we look at indicators, for example, seating, or how well designed or not are bus stops, and certainly some urban furniture that could adapt better to the kind of community that we have. So if the research is oriented to, okay, let's look at what is the community composition, what kind of people do we have? And what we do at our lab is we create personas. We look at, okay, this persona, which is an elderly with whatever physical disability or cognitive, whatever it is. And these are the special requirements and needs. And so we might, yes, use some qualitative research that has been done before, but that does not, I would say, it's not apart from looking at tangible measurements within the neighborhood, or some kind of indicators, as I mentioned, that could inform much better the concepts or the approach that we would introduce for discussion. So I think there's a lot of variables, factors in the physical environment that could be assessed, rather than just asking or going for questionnaires which could be misreaded somehow. Does that answer a little bit, or your question?
Can I comment on this?
I would like to let some more people voice their ideas on that.
Yeah. I think, the two shouldn't be opposed. Reveal preference is one thing. That's what you're talking about, is like what people do, etc. is an artifact. Is really a sort of positivist kind of attitude. And then the aspiration, people wanting different things and so on. I mean, come on, I mean, let's kind of be a little bit kind of like aware. I mean, we never knew that we needed a kind of like the smartphone. Some guy kind of like came with this crazy idea, and then we all have it. Okay, so I think, I mean, aspiration and vision is part of the process. I agree that the reveal preference is a point of departure, a point of, but I wouldn't use it as a lever for everything. I think this is, I mean, you can look, I mean, in economics, there's something called the Lucas critic, which is an interesting thing. So like, I mean, in a way, when you research a neighborhood, you have a pattern. I mean, if you believe that the built environment is kind of like part of the result of policy, et cetera, and then there's a relationship about how people interact with it, and I mean, different people will interact in a different way. Some people which have high economic stature won't look at the neighborhood in the same ways than other people, and so on. So there's so many variables. They change so fast. They can change so fast, and so on. So I think, I mean, we need to give credit to as well. I may agree on a way that, I mean, if you do a consultation and you get the same 10 people that always like vocal, etc., it might not be a good kind of way of getting, I mean, as well I would say the aspiration and the vision of that kind of area. But it's important to as well take that into account in a way. So that's the Lucas critic is quite. Is saying essentially it's like whatever you do at any one time, I mean, somehow the built environment is kind of like the result of policies that existed. So if those policies were to change, I mean, that interaction would kind of change. And possibly if you have your study hasn't really kind of like has just described what is happening, but not understanding the underlying kind of like micro foundation of this behavior, you may just kind of like reify what is there, but I mean, not necessarily know how to change it in a way, in a right direction and so on. So I will argue that, I mean, both yeah, the kind of reveal pattern, as Alvaro is kind of saying, is important. But I would say as well, I mean, we need better tool. I mean, in my view, at the moment we have plenty of tool. I mean, with big data, blah blah blah, and on kind of like the art kind of like reveal preference. But we have little way of leveraging maybe that common awareness in this way, the social media to kind of better understand aspiration, willingness to change, and so on and so forth, you know, which are important as well. I mean, I give you an example. I mean, in Hong Kong, it's been very successful to contain COVID. Yeah. No initiative whatsoever to increase the public space. I mean, like we've seen in every kind of like city and a municipality. But if you look at the evidence, there's no relationship between, density and COVID. And Hong Kong is a good proof of that in a way. But still, all municipalities took the opportunity to use that as a way to implement policy, and they are right. And in a way, I mean, yeah, we need, I mean, whatever opportunity is there to kind of like take away a little bit from the car and so on and so forth, because I mean, despite there's no whatsoever evidence that, I mean, density has got to do with COVID. So I think, I mean, the situation with knowledge and the built environment is a bit more complex than just about reveal preference. How do we want to live? It's not big data that is going to tell us. I mean, big data is telling us what we have been giving, and it's good and it's important. But there's about the question. I mean, it's, at the end of the day, it's political. It's not just a positivist kind of like point of view. I think that's my.
I might
2 cents.
Can I respond, Jason?
Yeah.
Yes, second. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. I was not expecting this question on this forum, and very happy that this is there, and we need more of such questions in this kind of a gathering. I think, to be honest, for me, the fundamental question is whose evidence, right? And what is evidence when we say that? And that is a point of departure from saying from positivist to post-positivist and maybe constructivist, right? And so there are two things here. Are we looking at evidence from a positivist or post-positivist, which I would prefer, or also look at evidence as which is constructed, right? Evidence may be different from different people. So it's a whole different area of discussion, but I think that we are at a kind of a place where we need to kind of acknowledge that yes, we are stuck in a positivist world, and we need to kind of, in terms of the tools and the methods, we need to evolve beyond that. You know, the narration, if you look at the narrative-based research and the constructivist research, they have become much more nuanced and much more sensitive to people on the ground. But if you look at the quantitative research and the so-called the hard research, I think we are still stuck in some notions that we need to go beyond. In terms of, when we talk about walkability, if you look at a constructivist view of walkability, it means so much nuance, so much meaning into it. And the minute you try to quantify it using one approach or the other, it reduces to a number which totally drives all the nuances, and it assumes that, you know, that one number captures, say, walkability for everybody in the world, right? Forget gender or ethnicity or race or income or anything. So we have this tendency to, of a reductionist tendency in some kind of an evidence-based world, whereas the other evidence-based world has kind of made leaps and bounds. So how do we bridge that gap, you know, between the nuance, the qualitative, the constructivist approach, and the post-positivist or the still positivist thing, is something that I am grappling with all the time.
One thing that has really grabbed my mind was actually studying some of Hannah Arendt's writings and starting to understand the tyranny of the bell curve and normal distribution, and how that's kind of used in a practice. It kind of homogenizes. It makes everything look like everything else. And I think that the methodology is still useful, but we need to not fall into the trap of just being under the bell, and actually look at the ends of our curves and go, what's exceptional about, you know, our data? You know, not what's normal within the realms of health, safety, and welfare. Yeah, definitely we need to, you know, stay under the bell curve. But when we start to really want to look at what is place, what is the context, who are these people, we don't want to spend nearly so much time in the middle of that data set. We need to be looking at, you know, at the ends. That's been my feeling that I've been, you know, coming to.
Okay, thank you, Jason. And we take one last comment from Tomislav.
Thank you, Nadia. I just wanted to add to the discussion regarding the comments and what Jason and the participants also said, maybe to continue on Saket's notion that I think that we're not as much stuck in the positivist approach, but rather that the positivist approach is being reinforced. The search for hard data is being reinforced both within the academy and within the market. I mean, from the start of the 20th century, I mean, the first and second Chicago School of Urban Sociology has been pushing towards more qualitative research and has given huge insights into how urban design, especially on the scale of urban planning and not just design of specific objects or urban equipment, has been influential in elucidating how to apply urban design in a more better way, even not only in sociology, but even in anthropology. American anthropology since the 60s, 70s, and 80s has been given by interviewing people, by researching their behavior and everyday practices and narratives, has been given various inputs or insights on American racial and urban segregation, which has been enforced and created by sticking to the hard facts. I think that I agree, Jason, what you said about the bell curve, which is an important issue, and which is why I wrote that necessity of opening evidence-based design to social sciences and humanities, or liberal arts, however we want to call them, because there has been since the 70s and 80s, a strong push within urban society, within humanities such as urban sociology or cultural anthropology or urban anthropology, especially towards those who usually under the stakeholder model go beyond being acknowledged as a stakeholder. Minorities, migrant communities, impoverished communities who all regularly suffer from decisions made by hard numbers and hard facts, and who offer, and of course, what Alvaro said, there is a problem of communication in general, that scientific articles about these issues are not only closed within the walls of academia, but also that the scientific articles usually just stop at presenting a part of research instead of showing the full extent of research. And in most cases, the applied, if you'd like, activist approach of those researchers in helping those communities to deal with urban space and in a way redesigning or reclaiming urban space following the design process. So I think that the connections and the openings, the communication must be not only on the level of reading papers, but actually a fruitful communication of the entire process, and not just the research, but the entire. Yeah, I agree, Jason. Storytelling is relevant in this sense that it is. There has to be a better communication to include various, not just the papers that are reviewed and published, but the entire research process that leads and the activities that researchers usually perform in the communities that they research.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tomislav. I think the last comments have opened, a whole new discussion on research in general, not just EBD, and a subject that we could discuss for much more time. But anyway, thank you very, very much. I think it's been a very fruitful discussion, a very fruitful meeting. I hope you enjoyed it too. I think it has opened new challenges for us in the project. We will keep you updated. We will be sending you information about our project. And we do hope that you may be able to join us in future activities and in person, hopefully sometime, as we keep going on with the online meetings. So thank you very, very much for being here with us today and sharing your experiences and your knowledge. At least in this context, we can share knowledge.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alan, Anna, Alvaro, Roberto, Saket for participating, Cristalla and Anna for the research presentation, and everybody else for being with us.